Hi everybody, welcome back to Venus through the signs part 2, Libra through to Pisces. So if you haven't seen part 1, go back and check that out, especially if you're new here and you're not familiar with the esoteric lens through which we are primarily focusing on in these videos and on this channel, because the recap will go through Venus in her nature esoterically, the connection to the fifth ray, concrete knowledge and science, and the ajna center, and the way in which Venus is all about perception. But we won't repeat that here because you can go back to the first video and check that out there, or see my Venus video alternatively. Okay, let's jump right into it and start with Venus in Libra. Libra is the other domicile for Venus, exoterically considered, so she is at home here. Libra, depending on the system that you're working with, is typically considered a masculine sign, which the air signs are typically of given that gender. However, Libra is really the most androgynous sign in the zodiac because it deals with pairs of opposites on all scales, all pairs of opposites and all fronts, which is why it is a sign of law and justice and karma. Saturn is exalted here, and Saturn is also the hierarchical ruler of this sign. And it's that which will take the seed from Aries, where the will of God is known, esoterically considered, and the blueprint of God, and then it has to come into a point of balance. So Libra thus is actually quite a potent sign for manifestation and creativity, and typically we might associate the earth signs with that, water and earth, manifestation and creativity, working with dense substance. But Libra is really about the coming into understanding of law and order, consequences, action and reaction. This is a great place for learning about karma at its maturing level. At the more basic level, however, Libra is the give and take between relationships. This is why she's Venus ruled exoterically. It's about you and me and reciprocity and coming together. So the Libran person and a Venus in Libra person will be all about that conjunctio, wanting to come together, have a desire for relationship and to know the other, and to learn about the self through the other. There will be a preoccupation with this. Sometimes we can see almost a bit of a flare with this position of a little hint at Scorpio, which we so often see with the Libra and Scorpio thing. And sometimes we do see Libran personalities express in almost quite scary Scorpionic way. And this is because of the scales that tip, where if there isn't a balance, there can be a tipping to materiality versus the tipping to spirituality. And then in which case, if there is a tip towards spirituality and living the truth, then there's a consummation between spirit and matter, and that kind of changes the fundamental nature of how we act in life. That is the secret of relationship, right? If there's a proper alchemical fusing, Venus is a fifth ray planet and is the planet of science and alchemy, right? It's the higher order of merging. There's a transformation that happens in that process. So Venus in Libra, yes, from the exoteric standpoint, the love of relationship, the wanting to play that game of the give and take, and coming back to the thought that I almost lost, there can be an echo of the Scorpionic theme where there can be sometimes the inversion of the give and take relationship. And this is where we may see things like prostitution. We would likely see it if there was some kind of plutonic aspect there with Venus as well. So it's not necessarily a given, but the theme of reciprocity, that's sex and money, the male and female, the exchange of these energies, this awareness and these lessons of either love or exploitation. Because of course a relationship where there is exploitation is a consequence of a lack of love, you see. But there's a playing out. I mean, this is a big human theme, right? And all the air signs really embody this problem and the question mark of how we come into right relationship. And they are all the human signs in terms of there not being an animal attributed to these signs, right? It's about the principle of consciousness, which is cultivating understanding and the contextualizing, relating from one thing to another. So this is a bigger theme of humanity at large, but especially for Libra, that the interchange between those opposites is really poignant and of a certain focal point. So the function of Libra generally, and then with a certain emphasis with Venus being in Libra, because she is that mental function of the developing of discrimination, is to engage and learn about the law of love through that give and take, becoming conscious of the interplay of the opposites. And I so often talk about the psychological attribution to Libra with the anima and the animus problem, which is so often that which our libido in terms of desire now going into Venus and her lower expression as the astral desire and what I want and what turns me on. So much of that libidinal energy is moved by our psychic projections, and it's the deeper way in which the personality is trying to seek wholeness, but we need to become conscious of that. So that the purpose for Venus in Libra is to awaken the consciousness and that contemplation of the interplay of the opposites. Again, coming back to, is this exploitative? What am I trying to get from this person? What am I giving away? Where is there an imbalance there? Is love at the center, right, the leading between the two opposites? Is love at the center of this equation or not? So Venus in Libra, when we're starting to work with it more subjectively, the evolving consciousness, a psychological approach, and then leading into the esoteric approach, is going to be about that question and asking it in the way as to seek the truth at the center of these things. So bringing in psychic balancing and then paving the way for what can eventually be that Uranian hint, because Uranus is the esoteric ruler of this sign Libra, for that marriage to happen. So from the evolution of the exoteric to esoteric, yes, Venus in Libra can be a popular person, someone who naturally attracts relationship. There's your lower aspect of Venus there, and she is a magnetic attractor. So a Venus in Libra person will usually be able to pair up very effectively, very well, very quickly. They are the taken person, so they're likely always going to be in relationship. But that evolution is to ask about what is the true nature of relationship, and a hint at the Scorpio thing again, where sometimes that the problem is getting lost in the desire and the nature of desire. And Venus, as she rules Taurus and Libra, and then with Saturn being exalted in Libra, it's all about that evaluating and becoming conscious of what is the nature of my desire, what's true, what's false, and how do I adjust. Think weighing the scales. How do I adjust the scales so that these different aspects of being can come into balance and relationship? So I think that is a good place to move on to the next sign, Venus in Scorpio. Now, this is a sign of detriment to Venus for a similar reason, esoterically, that we looked at in Aries, which is the other sign of detriment for Venus. But we'll get to the esoteric hint in a little bit. Let's just start with what we tend to see exoterically. Venus, desire, materiality, relationship is sometimes secluded a little bit in Scorpio, a sign of secrecy. So sometimes that can, from the exoteric standpoint, be why she's in detriment. Maybe Venus, which is typically open, Scorpio can be a little bit closed off. That might be a lesser aspect of Mars, and sometimes that Marsian energy can be a bit like, you know, I'm not sure about you, go away. It's that slightly offensive, defensive quality that can come with Venus. Come with Mars as it rules Scorpio exoterically. So that's one of the ways in which it can sometimes be a challenging placement from that angle. But what we tend to see for the most part is a real problem, and this is starting to hint at the esoteric delineations here, of glamour and the Maya and the way in which the perceptive faculty, Venus in the fifth ray, ruling the head center, is hidden and confused in the sign of the Maya. The exoteric keynote for the sign Scorpio is let Maya flourish and deception rule. And so we're connected to the nine-headed Hydra in Scorpio. It's all of the the unredeemed astral energy that we find through the 7 astral subplanes, which Scorpio rules. So we might say then that perception is blinded. True balancing perception, as we talked about with becoming conscious, or just before when we looked at Venus in Libra and what we're supposed to evolve into with that contemplation, the capacity to discern and discriminate what is true becomes that much more difficult in Scorpio, which is a sign of the Maya and of where the densification of all of that desire happens. So one of the ways in which, one of the lesser aspects of the expression of Venus in Scorpio, how it can appear, is the way in which the sexuality, Scorpio being a sign of sex, ruling the sex organs, having that connection to the sacral center, and Scorpio being a sign of the black magician as well, of black magic, in terms of the depth that comes with Scorpio placements when it's unconscious, means that there's that plugging into all of that dense astral material, and that's where you can get nefarious activity there, or abusive energies, or some of those inversions of the plutonic energies. Now, the higher octave of Scorpio is what? Psychological transformation, the phoenix rising, resurrection. It's a higher function of Pluto as well, which is the esoteric ruler of Pisces, you know, where the Christ is resurrected and reborn. But you know, it evolves into the transfiguration of that depth. And this is why Scorpio can be a great healing sign and a great psychological sign and a very intuitive and insightful sign, which is somewhat true for all water signs. And it's particularly that emphasis upon healing. But when Venus is there and it's the lesser aspect, we've got that identification with the dark, but blind identification with the dark. And there can be sometimes a manipulation of the sexual energy, and that the power problem, again, a densification and a further crystallization of some of those exploitative themes that we just discussed with Libra. So there can be a person who manipulates the sexual energy to get what they want. I've also seen some cases where the person with Venus in Scorpio expressing in its shadow element, but not as a sexually manipulative angle, but they as individuals can get sucked into the glamour and the false projection of the person that they are in relationship with. So an example, I'm thinking of someone I know personally, an acquaintance who has Venus in Scorpio, found out that the person she was with was a narcissist, or was saying one thing and then doing another thing behind her back. And it was very shocking for her, and she, since having to remove herself from that situation, she's asking all those questions of how, okay, was he always like that? Was it there the whole time? How did I not see it? What's going on with my perception that I couldn't work it out? So all of these questions coming up as a result, and I didn't get an impression from this person that she was kind of that, what we just discussed before with the sexual manipulation, which can sometimes happen with this sign. But that's a really good example, again, because Venus perception lost in the scorpionic sign of glamour and the Maya. And Scorpio is a lesser known sign of narcissism for that reason, because it is the veil of the illusion, right? So the false self, the tale and the myth of Narcissus, gazing onto his reflection and then eventually dying, like falling in love with his reflection, but not really knowing who his true self is, right? So that a good example of the way in which perception can fall into the Maya. But with that real life example I just gave too, now this person is asking those questions, engaging in a therapeutic practice, thinking about trauma and the body, and you know, learning all of these different things. So now we're seeing that evolution of that placement with becoming psychologically aware and being able to work out what is true. And why did I fall into that trap there? What's going on within me? So this is the potential evolution psychologically of this placement, where you can, we spoke about Venus in Cancer in the last video, and I gave the example of Carl Jung. So his perception, and Venus is always going to bring penetrative perception, right? That's the charging bull, as it is in Taurus, irradiating light into density. So in Carl Jung's case, going into the collective unconscious, mass consciousness of Cancer and mapping the archetypes. So with Scorpio, there's a little hint of that, Venus in Scorpio that is, of being able to become that healer, become that which can transfigure. But there has to be that discrimination and a becoming conscious of what is all of this psychological stuff going on in me, and how did that happen. It's almost like the undercover spy a little bit with this placement. So that's a really cool point of evolution, once again, with the water signs always bringing the potential for healing, transformation, transfiguration, and the redemption of substance, as it is so encapsulated by the water signs. And of course, their polar opposite signs are earth. So earth and water, often transformation, transfiguration of substance and desire. So, and we will finish with Venus in Scorpio with that important note as to why she's in detriment from the purely esoteric level. And that is because in the last analysis, when we're talking about discipleship, which Scorpio rules, that's the battle with the 9-headed Hydra that Hercules goes through. The mental principle, that is Venus, just as we saw in Aries, as I mentioned at the beginning of this segment, the mental principle must bow down and be crucified in the confrontation with the spirit, in which case in Scorpio is seen through Uranus being exalted here. Uranus being the planet of intuition, occult discipleship in that higher octave, and where the spirit is exalted upon that resurrection of the phoenix. That's why, you know, a spirit incarnates into matter. Uranus is a 7th ray planet, right, of matter and substance, and connected to the sacral center. So that's why Uranus is exalted in Scorpio, because once we overcome and redeem matter, then the spirit is able to become alive and fully manifest through substance all the way down to the ground. And so Venus, as the mental principle in that process, must always bend to the spirit. And that's the same with Mercury as well. The luminaries fade out when in confrontation with the spirit, because logic and reason, which is an attribution of Venus because she rules the mind, that's great, and you need that for discernment. But in the last analysis, particularly with discipleship, and at the point of the 2nd degree initiation, which is what we're talking about here with Scorpio and discipleship, that what we call the angel of the presence, which is this astral counterpart to the soul as it begins to descend in the body, that's this glorious image of the angelic force that comes down to penetrate the form. And in that process, there's no mental discrimination that you're using at that point. It's a full death crucifixion that happens. So it's a little similar to what we saw in Aries, which is the other Venus detriment sign, where the sun is exalted in Aries. So the mind in the last analysis, the mental faculties bow down to that spirit, which is the one fundamental glorious center of manifestation, something like that. So in the last analysis, a Venus in Scorpio person, when they're anchored into the soul-centered life and upon the fixed cross, will be someone who really understands the nature of sacrifice and will be able to communicate that is insofar as Venus, in her connection to the mind, has a relationship to communication and the sharing of ideas. So this is someone who can transmit the intelligence of sacrifice, not dissimilar to the Piscean quality, which is where Venus is exalted, but we'll get to that soon. Let's go to Venus in Sagittarius. Now, this is a cool one because we have the 5th ray. There's three rays that express through Sagittarius. We've got rays 4, 5, and 6, and Venus is a 5th ray planet. So there's some good potentiality for focused ideas and being able to map the processes and procedures of the path, because Sagittarius becomes that focused archer and the knight upon the horse. But we're getting ahead of ourselves here. Let's start with the exoteric. Venus in Sagittarius is fun. We're lining up with the other benefic here, Jupiter, which rules Sagittarius exoterically. So we're seeing an optimistic person, someone who wants to encourage expression, a little bit like Venus in the other fire signs. We talked about Leo and the need to really be loved and adored in one's expression. So this is another flavor here with Sagittarius, but a bit more of an active momentum kind of attitude with it. I was watching a video of someone talking about this placement, and they said that this was the archetype of the cheerleader, which I really loved. It's that positive person cheering you on, wanting to express and get out there. Sagittarius is a sign of popularity, someone who can naturally be enjoyed and likes people, likes to be the center of attention, and in that social way, in that active way, a well-liked personality typically. So in that way, Venus in Sagittarius can be quite pleasant from a temperamental standpoint. We can also see those challenges with Jupiterian optimism, where we have too lofty a goal, too lofty expectations, and sometimes that issue of commitment that comes with generally the Gemini Sagittarius axis and the tendency for it to be mercurial and temperamental. So a need to become focused and practical, right? Which we start to see a bit more of in Sagittarius, where we look at it esoterically. I would say the great challenge of Venus in Sagittarius from that exoteric and personality-centered standpoint is a kind of optimistic idealization rather than a realism about relationship, which would be the Venusian theme. So a tendency to have that Jupiterian optimism, and sometimes that even Jupiter is associated with theology and principles of truth. Sometimes a delusion about the person that you're with fitting into some ideal that ends up, and that can end up crumbling. So that idealism problem can be really an issue with this placement. And so always the invitation for the Sagittarian placements is to ground out of the lesser aspect of Jupiter, which is ideals and attitudes, and getting too lost in principles, which may very well be true, but the reality of that being translated into reality and being able to get that earthiness and seeing what's right here, that is the great challenge with Venus in Sagittarius from that exoteric standpoint. Esoterically though, once again, we have a lining up of the rays here with rays 5, and then we consider the esoteric ruler of Sagittarius, which is the earth, talking about the need for Sagittarius to become earthy and practical. It becomes very dynamically practical and able to achieve at the esoteric level, whereas that can be often the challenge for Sagittarian placements exoterically, because there's the lofty ideals and the emotionality, that's the fourth ray expressing through Sagittarius in that way, the sort of the karma manas and instinctual desire, and I want to do this and I want to do this, but a failure to concretize, or giving up easily, or allowing your attention to wander off and go, okay, I'm going to do this thing next. Like that's that floaty, too on the surface problem with Sagittarius. Esoterically, the earth comes online with Sagittarius, and now we're awakening that intuition. So we've evolved through that challenge of being able to discern and discriminate what actually is from my truest self versus just these kind of instinctual impulses that I'm getting in Sagittarius. We see that problem in Gemini, and Sagittarius, when we talk about it as a broader esoteric axis, is about slowing down and then aligning with the vertical self. So with Gemini, we have Venus merging the two halves together and connecting the higher self, anchoring it into the form, creating that wedding in that way. And then moving to Sagittarius esoterically, now I've got that connection to my higher self, and knowing what the purpose is, I can pinpoint and focus the goal. This is the refinement and the maturation of the archer. So, and Venus and the Earth, again, have this special relationship, not just rayologically with rays 5 and 3, but Venus is said to be the higher self of the Earth. So this placement, very, very potent for soul-centered work, for knowing with a capital K, not the principle of knowledge as it's theologically connected to Sagittarius through its lesser Jupiterian connotation, or at least exoteric connotation, but real, true knowledge of who am I really, what is my goal and my purpose, and what are the practical daily steps that I need to take to actually bring that goal to fruition. That's the earth influence right there. This is where Sagittarius can become a very earthy sign, because it's dissolved all of that emotionality around idealism now, because we're talking about a soul-centered individual, and we're concretizing and focusing what we know is the place that we're going. And that's the Sagittarian archer going to the base of the mountain in Capricorn, the mountain then becoming the sign of initiation and where we achieve that spiritual goal. So a great communicator of the path, which is somewhat true generically about Sagittarius as a sign esoterically, but a real great capacity for communication of the path, what's needed to be done, that translating ability. We're seeing Gemini Sagittarius as the teaching axis, as the information axis, and at its highest level is that which can communicate the spiritual ideas from above or from the higher self, and knowing how to bring them into being and to cultivate and refine the process by which that spiritual life can anchor in and become realized in the form. And that's, in a broader level, all functions of the the mutable signs, is to slow down that horizontality, if you will. Here, reacting, be quiet, find that inner connection, and then bring that out forward and in a very focused and considered way. Here's a nice sentence from Alan Oken about this placement. Venus in this sign may find that they are especially gifted in the application of abstract, technical, or metaphysical information to the practical needs of Earth and humanity. So really quite a nice placement from the esoteric standpoint, and we see once again lining up, Venus and the Earth, but then also bringing in the higher octave of Jupiter, which is that great all-inclusive capacity to relay spiritual truth, Jupiter, into the daily practical reality and needs of immediate human life. Venus in Capricorn, very interesting placement, again esoterically, because Venus is the hierarchical ruler of Capricorn, where the goat becomes the unicorn, single-pointed horn emerging from the ajna center. But from this personality standpoint, we can see all of those qualities of Capricorn in terms of one's mental focus. So it is a strong mental position, or has the potential to be, even from the personality angle. Mars, of course, is exalted in Capricorn, where we have the ability to focus our energies and desire and achieve the goal, whether that's a spiritual or a personality goal with Mars in Capricorn. With Venus here, it is, from the personality angle in its lowest aspect, can be the desire for relationship in a very materialistic way, a love of money, a love of social status. These are the faux materialism of Capricorn in its lesser aspect, the crystallization of desire in terms of its manifestation into hierarchical structures and things of this nature. So Venus in Capricorn can sometimes, if we think about Venus being in detriment in Scorpio from that standpoint of getting lost in the Maya, and then we touched on that with getting lost in materialism and the bits and pieces in Virgo, there can be a descending of perception into the veil of materiality and the concrete structures of the world, in which case we may have the crystallization of desire. So this is the lesser possible expression of this placement. We could also, as it's evolving, start to see the Venus in Capricorn person just have a good psychological awareness of how to bring about proper relationships and effective and efficient relationships in Capricornian spheres of materiality, of finance, of government, which are all these various different forms of Capricornian structures here. But we can also see the hint there, just in that more of a benefic placement, or a bit more of a scrutinizing objectivity, let's say, and more of a neutrality. We're not talking about the desire aspect of Venus in this case, but we can see that hint or inkling at the esoteric potentiality for this placement, which is really the capacity to irradiate divine truth, which is the higher aspect of Venus in terms of knowledge, into those concrete structures to bring about divine truth into reality. This is why she's the hierarchical ruler. We might say that in an evolved society where human beings are all realized, then all of those Capricornian structures of the world are holding, it's like the higher octave of, like we see the Illuminati symbol with the eye looking down. That's kind of the Venus in Capricorn symbol, but we think about that in its positive potentiality, which would be the eye of the single eye truth of God, and all of that is good and benefic in the world, being able to stand at the top and irradiate that throughout the forms of reality, and to have government structures, or those concretized physical structures, reflect that divine truth. Just as Venus in her connection to Taurus, we talk, that's the focus bull, being able to permeate and radiate the form, and getting very, getting artistic in that way, that precision. We're seeing that same motif of the light penetrating materiality in Capricorn. It becomes really clear to see why she would be the hierarchical ruler of this sign. So again, an ability at the evolved level to hold that single pointed truth, that intuitive awareness of what is true, of the will, and then moving that into those Venusian themes of the sphere of right relationships, knowing how to bring things together, to organize, to structure. This is all of the best qualities of the earth signs in general, to bring about that focused manifestation of this goal, of this structure, how it needs to happen, who can be best placed here to bring that all together. So all of those practical elements of the relational principle of Venus, but all in service to this higher octave of Capricorn and the holding of the higher centers, and allowing that to be the force which shapes the concrete structures of the world. Venus in Aquarius, such a strong placement esoterically. Maybe one of the better placements for Venus to be esoterically. She's a fifth ray planet. Aquarius is a fifth ray sign, and esoterically Jupiter rules Aquarius. So another alignment of the benefics, but the benefics both in their highest qualities here when we consider it esoterically. Now from the exoteric angle, Venus in Aquarius, well, we have the relational sign, what we desire and want from relationships, and Aquarius can be the, not the outcast sometimes, but the one who's a bit different, who wants to go their own way, hinting at some of the impulses of Uranus as it expresses exoterically. So someone who wants things to be a little bit different, or maybe has some quirks or certain obscure interests in matters of love, relationship, sex, romance, and all of these sorts of things. So we might say someone with Venus in Aquarius needs someone who's a little quirky, or likes things to be a little bit different, or if we're starting to follow the impulses of the group, the urge towards group networking and connectivity, being united in a cause, right? Or even meeting someone through a social organization that has a sort of unifying theme of service, because yes, we're moving into the Aquarian age, and so even at the exoteric level we can start to see some of these impulses of Aquarius in that sense. So we have a nice little lining up of Venus and Uranus in that case. But esoterically, we're talking about the fifth ray here, and a real capacity to bring loving relationship to every group sphere, a clear seeing and discerning of the integrity of each group, what people are trying to do in each group. There's a great, Aquarius is the great love sign, with Jupiter being its esoteric ruler and being the water bearer. So then we have that flowing benefic energy of Jupiter in its highest possible sense, moving through and with Venus, the mental faculty, communication, translation of ideas, and that which brings people and things together. So just as with Venus in Gemini as the esoteric domicile, there we talked about being able to bring any relationship together, or there's the common touch, or here, you here, and finding that point in common. We have a similar echo of that with Venus in Aquarius, but at this broader scope. So it's much more about the groups that we're working with, or the different, attitudes from that. More of a collective attitude with the common touch thing that we see with Gemini. So touching on Oaken's words here, this placement embodies a tremendous blessing and a most powerful potential for the distribution of the second ray of love, wisdom in human relationships. The mind is inspired, again, strong 5th ray placement. The mind is inspired to work toward the creation of those technical advances which serve to provide a pathway for Jupiter's love to enter the life stream of humanity. So they're drawn to the forefront of service to humanity, often with the soul-centered, well, definitely with the soul-centered person here. So almost a little hint too at Venus in Capricorn in terms of this practical piece with bringing the truth into the form, but more related to relationships and group relations. So being able to unite diverse groups of people with their attitudes and bringing that all together to bring about the fruition of the truth, or the benefic love principle. Of course, then, as Oaken mentioned, the use of technology to do that as well. So great placement, a great time to be alive if you are a Venus in Aquarius person and you're starting to move to the fixed cross and express that solar life. Another thing that Alan points out, which is the general shadow of Aquarius, psychologically or exoterically, is the diffusion quality. So Aquarius is a very mental sign, and being polar opposite to Leo, where we have an intense self-focus, Aquarius is very much a group focus, but the shadow of that is that the Aquarian person, and the problem with all air signs in terms of their superficiality here, the Aquarian can be very diffused and almost have, it's very different to Cancer, but they're similar in that they both have this mass consciousness element. Cancer more mass instinctual astral consciousness, Aquarius more group ideological consciousness. So one can get very much lost with, and I've seen it with a few Aquarians, of getting lost in certain technological interests and ideas, or just following the trends of the thing that they're into without really knowing where they are as an individual at the center. Same thing with, I mean, that's a technology example. I'm thinking of a specific person who had that exact problem. But the other thing would be, I've seen a few people with this problem as well who have strong Aquarius energy. The identification with the cause, like, oh, I'm against animal cruelty, and which is great and all of that, but an immersion in that in a way where there still isn't a depth of self and a deeper connection to authenticity, which would be discovered and uncovered through Leo, which is about, okay, but who am I really? So that's the higher aspect of Leo there. And of course, when we consummate that polarity, we would have intense self-focus leading to the revelation of the divine self, and then moving out into the group and flowing the solar energy, Sun ruling Leo, flowing that into the group, and then Sun as a second ray planet lining up with Jupiter as the sacred second ray planet. So that centralizing point that you see in Leo that allows for So superficiality in terms of like being too mental and too much stuck in the ideas or the principles, and you know, the group cause that one is identified with. This is often the case with Aquarius. So if we're talking about Venus in Aquarius, there can be a diffusion and a lack of real, true seeing of the nature of, an understanding of the nature of relationships as it pertains to how this individual is relating to the group. So it can be a blind loss of the relational principle in the group nature, but actually maybe there isn't a capacity to really acknowledge, okay, but what actually is a serving relationship relative to me, because it's exactly that piece of centralizing that Aquarius loses in its exoteric expression. I hope that makes sense. So a diffusing of the relational principle into the group spheres and sort of getting a bit lost and unfocused in that way. So that's always going to be the challenge for the air signs, is becoming focused and developing depth through their fire opposites, with centralizing into the self, and the higher aspect of the fire signs being the connection to the spirit, not the arrogant, lesser, egocentric personality self. So Venus in Aquarius. Let's move to our final sign, Venus in Pisces, the sign of exaltation for Venus. Why should Venus be exalted here? Well, because the Piscean problem is that of the suffering of substance. Pluto, the esoteric ruler of Pisces, cuts the thread that binds the two fish together, embodied through Jesus, through his crucifixion. So Pluto will always, in its highest aspect, always destroys that which limits the flow of consciousness. That's the best case scenario for Pluto. It never destroys the consciousness aspect. It can't, because the consciousness aspect, that of the soul and that of the spirit, never dies. The truth cannot be dissolved. There can only be confusion and delusion and putting more shit in the way, right? And that can be the Piscean problem of loosey-goosey here. So Venus then reunites. Now we see Venus is the marriage, right? We see the marriage component in Libra. In Taurus, it's merging with my desires, the lower aspect of the five senses, becomes more relational in Libra. In Gemini, merges the higher self. So as we spoke with Gemini, Mercury, here's my personality self, here's my higher self. Discern and discriminate, discern and discriminate. And when there's a choice made towards that soul, and the free choice is implied in Gemini, because we don't have the binding that we do in Pisces, we can make the choice in Gemini, whereas in Pisces, something has to die and be crucified and end. Venus in Gemini will unite the two together. So Venus through Pisces then will join matter and spirit back together once Pluto has cut the bullshit out, essentially. This is why esoterically she is exalted in the sign of Pisces. She creates that marriage to the Father, as in the spirit aspect. Okay? So the bring down of universal loving consciousness, the love of the Father, the real beauty of this placement in its highest sense is the true knowing of what love is, and that is divine love, and the capacity to bring that into substance. This is a very devotional placement, and of course this is where we can see some of the positive aspects of it as it expresses through the personality. But as is always the case with Piscean elements at its lowest level, even though she is exalted there, from a personality standpoint, we can see a lot of sentimentality with Pisces. It's a very astral sign, it's a water sign, and it is very mutable. So even though she's exalted, and we talk about being a planet being dignified in astrology and all of this, and that's all relevant from the standpoint of exoteric techniques, from the soul-centered point of view, I would still look at someone with Venus in Pisces and be asking that question of where is there this astral glamour of sentimentality? And that's where it can be, we get maybe beautiful feelings of love and getting lost in love. And see, this is all a lesser expression of both Jupiter in its second ray quality, fusing with experience, and Neptune, which can also be delusion and deception. So even though she is exalted here, from the personality angle, when we're connecting it to being awakened to the truth, and incarnating that into being and bringing the fixed cross energies in, it can still be glamoured. So, poetic overindulgences in relationship, or really getting lost in the other. But what we really want to see, and the true reason why Venus is exalted in this sign, is getting lost in God, the true love, because it is really the spirit of who we truly are that we wish to merge with. So part of this sentimentality problem, or this devotional issue, wrong devotion that we see with Pisces generally, is embodied through the fact that Mercury has detriment, right? Because Mercury is what? The discriminating faculty. So in some sense, we need to, with this placement and with all Piscean placements, we need to develop the mercurial capacity for discrimination. That's the evolution of Pisces to Virgo, by the way. Practical discrimination. What's actually going on here? And we know that Pisces, strong Piscean energy, can be very psychic and mediumship, but that's the lower aspect, because the medium has to become mediator. And to do that, it's like, I'm communicating with the astral energies, but is what you're saying actually true? Right, so Mercury needs to be developed in terms of the discriminative faculty, and that's the reasoning element that we see in Gemini, where Gemini is about discrimination. Lowest level Gemini is this idea. Evolving becomes a little bit like Libra, and that's a sign of intermediary development for Gemini, and vice versa for Libra to Gemini. So developing the reasoning faculty is really important with any Piscean placements, and to then discern, discriminate, activate Pluto in terms of I must destroy my false self. And the Piscean problem will always be being able to pinpoint the thing which is inhibiting you. Inhibition, addiction, escapism, the deep suffering that comes from being disconnected to who you really are. It's disconnection from God. That's why Pisces becomes very theological, or is the sign of Christianity, for instance. And the sixth ray is the religious ray of looking up to that which is beyond, but which is truly you. And the sixth ray is a focused concentration of the love principle, right? It's a personal love. That's why it's devotional rather than just all-inclusive love, bring it all together. Very single-pointed. That's why Mars has that is connected to the sixth ray, where we have that warriorhoodness there. But Venus, when we can work out this discrimination problem, when we can wield the power of Pluto properly, we have the great teacher of love. And it's an echo to Gemini. Gemini is the teaching sign, right? And which it rules, Venus rules Gemini esoterically. So there's innate connection here of Gemini communicating, bringing ideas together. But then with the Venus in Pisces person, we have a brilliant mystic, someone who can transmit the ideas and communicate the revelation of true spiritual love. Yes, there can be an element of that in Gemini, but it'll be shaped by other different forces, and certainly communicating of a variety of different spiritual ideas, the general metaphysician quality, such as, someone like myself with a Gemini rising. But for a Pisces Venus person, really that mystical bent, and one of my favorites, really good example of someone who went through discipleship and achieved initiation in her life was Saint Teresa of Avila, who had a Pisces rising, Venus on the ascendant, right on the ascendant, so the exaltation right there, and Pluto on the midheaven. And she really, so that dynamic interplay there, and she suffered greatly in her life. A lot of diseases, a lot of astral material that she passed through. But you see it in her writing, in the prayers that she wrote. The way that she speaks of her love of God is just, people in the mystic and religious communities still, she's often, she was a saint. And she wanted beautiful writings about God. So that is one of the great examples that we have, if you want to go check that out. That's a Venus in Pisces person. She even talks about in her biography, her autobiography, her lesser Venusian interests. So it's just to go to show that even if a planet is in exaltation, there's still just the reality of the mutable cross expressions. And when she was a little girl, she said she was very vain and cared only about the beautiful things, and wanted to be popular, and just very quintessential Venusian themes. But of course she became a nun, and then was all of that withdrawal from materiality and merging with Christ. And she even spoke about the soul awakening through the mind, which is a very Venus fifth ray quality there, right? And she said that the top part of the head where the soul is meant to first be met, something like that. So a very evolved individual there, the nun Saint Teresa of Avila, with the Venus exaltation in Pisces. We can really see that articulation of this esoteric placement here. Okay, my friends, that is our Venus Through the Signs series. Drop me a comment below if you've enjoyed this video. Please give it a thumbs up. It helps out the channel a lot. Subscribe if you haven't. And let me know about your Venus placement. Did you learn anything from this series? Can you see the differences between the exoteric expressions of your Venus placement versus the esoteric? I'd love to hear some of your reflections in the comments. So I hope to hear from you soon, and I'll see you in the next one. Thank you very much.